Thank you. As a preliminary matter, this is Brian Sullivan, Chair of the Affordable Housing Trust. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present, can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Dave Iverson.
Here.
Tom Murphy. Tom Dixon.
Here.
Penny Dye.
Here.
Meg Browers.
Here.
Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Ellis Ramos.
Here.
Thank you. Tucker Holland.
Here.
Vicky Marsh.
Here.
Anticipated speakers, Judy Barrett.
I'm here.
Good afternoon. This is the open meeting of the Affordable Housing Trust being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Affordable Housing Trust is convening by a video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website identifying how the public may join. Please note this meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating via video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that folks may be able to see you. Take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. We'll turn to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover ground rules. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, we'll go through the line of members, inviting each to provide need, comment, questions, or motions. Hold until you are called. Please remember to mute your phone or your computer when you're not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly in a way that generates accurate meeting minutes. For any response, please wait until the floor is yielded to you. If you wish to engage in conversation with other members, please do so through the chair. For items of public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their name, acknowledge, and speak to the chair. Finally, each vote will be conducted via roll call. Thank you for that. And I apologize. Let me get to the agenda. Forgive me, Alice, can you read me the first item?
It's approval of the agenda.
Okay, we're not taking on, we're not taking on minutes today, correct?
No, correct.
Okay, so I'd like to, a motion to amend the agenda to move. I'm sorry, I'm not looking at the right one. Alice, will you email it to me real quick? Go ahead, Penny.
Yeah, can you email it to me too? I couldn't find it.
We'll do it right now.
I'm
Maybe just send it to all of us again.
Doing
Thank
that
you.
right now. Just send it.
Thank you. Okay, so here it lists approval of minutes as number 3. So I'd like to amend the agenda to carry that with an action item to carry that over. I see no other changes. So I'll look for a motion to approve the agenda with the recommended amendment.
So moved.
The second? Okay, second from Meg, moved by Dave by roll call. Chantal Murphy.
Aye.
Dave Iverson,
Aye.
Tom Dixon,
Aye.
Penny Dye,
Aye.
Meg Browers,
Aye.
and Brian Sullivan's an aye. Open the meeting for public comment. Seeing none, close public comment, and move to year-round deed restriction. Judy, thank you for joining us.
That's fine. How are you today?
Doing well, doing well. How are you?
I'm fine.
Excellent.
I think what we were going to talk through today was get people thinking about where your biggest sources of support might be for this and where some of the opposition or concern, I don't even want to call it opposition, but where concerns about this might come from. It's sort of a similar conversation to what we had way back when we worked on the strategic plan and we were trying to think about where your allies might be in order to start building some strength of support for this concept sooner than later. I think I also wanted to make sure I really understand, that I understand, hopefully you all understand, what the goals are for this and what options you're open to in terms of a program design. I mean, I know there's tremendous interest, which I don't question, in the Vail model. But, you know, when you dig a little deeper into the Vail situation, it's very interesting. I mean, they have the program that was talked about a lot a few weeks back where they're buying effectively restrictions from existing property owners, but they also have a regulatory mechanism in their zoning that works differently. So I thought we should talk through this a little bit and find out kind of where you're hoping to be with this by the end of December.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I had someone say to me the other day and that they didn't think that with our zoning bylaws or that this would be problematic with the AG. Judy, is that truth or is that?
So I see Vicky turning toward the computer and I bet she has a thought on this too. I do have a concern about it. I don't have a huge, I mean, I don't think that the Attorney General's office would necessarily disapprove it, but I do suspect there would be a very long letter of cautions. I'm going to turn to Vicky. I think this is really a Vicky question.
So thanks, Trudy. Well, first of all, the AG would chime in if we do this as a zoning amendment
Right.
of any sort. And so if we decide not to do it as a zoning bylaw, but to do it similar to, I don't know, creating some form of a restriction in either general bylaws or some other mechanism. That I think, or actually doing it as a home rule petition to try to get the state legislature to buy into this and then to allow us to do this. That's probably the best way to try to approach this, I think, without having to get the AG involved. I think that it will take a little bit more time, perhaps, to get us through the legislature, especially where this is a relatively new concept, although it's already there are bills that are already in the legislature sort of addressing this. And so I think that a home rule petition would probably be the best way. And then you don't have to worry about really the AG chiming in necessarily as much as you are going to have to deal with the legislature and committee hearings.
So Vicky, I'm just going to jump in. I'm sorry. I'm Dave. I'll defer to you in a second.
No. Go, you go. You guys are the smart ones.
When you
I don't know about that, but
think about the home rule petition, Vicky, are you also thinking about including authority through zoning to require a year-round restriction in substantially the same manner as a community can require an affordable housing restriction or a conservation restriction? How do you see that playing out? Because I think that's a very important question.
yeah, and so I worked with the town of Provincetown, who has filed a bill already,
Yep.
And so there are a couple of things that are already in the legislature. One is chapter 184. There have been amendments that have been filed in a bill, not just by Provincetown. There are a couple of other communities, I believe, that are involved as well, that will amend the will amend the restrictions and the definitions of restrictions to include a year-round restriction.
Yeah.
So by including that and allowing for that, I think that first of all gets everyone over the first hurdle of, can we do this? Can it be a perpetual restriction? Because that's what that's what is being added to chapter 184, section 31. So that, I think that sort of addresses it. The other question is who would enforce it? And so chapter 184, section 32 has affordable housing restrictions and conservation restrictions enforced by what used to be DHCD, would enforce the affordable housing, now EOHLC. That wouldn't necessarily be who we would want to enforce the year-round restriction. Perhaps we would want to see the town's select boards having the power to enforce that restriction for each municipality. But that has to be refined in that statute, I think. So I think that addresses that question. Who would enforce this? I don't necessarily think we need to do it again by a zoning bylaw. I think that we could, let's see what the statute says, or include something in our home rule petition, which would allow the select board to have the power to be able to enforce the restriction. It would hold the restriction and then it would enforce the restriction.
Okay. I think we're on the same page.
Vicky, who enforces the restriction of the housing needs covenant program now as year round?
I believe that is the select board, but I'd have to go and take a look at it. But I think it is the select board.
So we have a pre-existing system that would be mirrored.
Yes, and you could also, we could also create a program similar to what we already have in place. So there could be something that would at least allow you to have the program, but we need the legislation, I think, or some kind of bylaw or regulation to get us to the point where we create this restriction that can be held by the select board.
Dave? Thank you, Vicky.
So through you, Mr. Chair, to Vicky again. So is Provincetown is doing a similar program? Is that what I understand you saying?
So they haven't, I haven't been asked to work on the so-called program right
Okay.
now. What they did was they participated with a couple of other municipalities to file legislation which would amend chapter 184, sections 30, 31, and 32, and 26, to allow for the creation of a year-round restriction that could be held perpetually. Okay,
And
so
so
that was
they're
one thing.
Posturing for this in the future.
Right. And they're working on so they have two different affordable housing trusts in Provincetown. And so they were working on having one of the affordable housing trusts be the holder of these restrictions. And that's what they were looking to do. And perhaps that's something that you could think about doing in Nantucket if you don't want the select board to be the holder. You may want to think about whether the Affordable Housing Trust would be the holder of those restrictions.
Is there any way we can get our hands on the changes they're looking to make so that we could?
Sure,
see
I can definitely get you those documents and send them off to you.
And they're doing it through a home rule petition?
Yes, I think so. Well, actually, they filed a bill.
And the statute to amend the
Right.
general laws, right?
To amend the general laws. So that's how they did that. And then they were working on this idea of having their affordable housing trust being involved. So I can get you what I've I've prepared thus far. And I can share that with you probably at our next meeting, maybe. Have
That
to
would
go
be
find it.
Thank
Would that
Be
be
great.
helpful?
I think
Very
that's
much.
awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
So come back to you, Judy.
So in the Attorney General, I think to the extent that we can sort of not go down that path, it'd be great, but it depends on the approach you're going to take. So, I mean, I do think for now, the focus probably ought to be the home rule petition. I'm just saying, I think that trying to jump to do this through some kind of a zoning requirement like inclusionary zoning could raise some issues. That's all I'm trying. For now, I think that's all I can say.
Well, you're here to make those recommendations, so I think we're prepared to follow your direction and course on that.
I mean, I am just really still trying to think through, and I think we all need to be thinking about how do you get development, future development to participate in this?
So to that note, are you suggesting the idea of adding a separate zoning change component in
I don't
this,
think
or
I would-
as a follow-up separately?
I think that's in the future. I think that you would want to, as Vicky had said, make sure that their statutory framework was there to allow the restrictions before trying to tack that into zoning. I'm just saying that I think ultimately thinking that the island is going to be able to buy enough restrictions to reach the goal that you need to get is kind of an illusion. And so thinking about other ways to get at this through other means, I think is probably going to need to be on the table for a while. That's all. But I'm just really wonder, you know, aside from people asking, well, maybe the Attorney General might have problems with this. Like, what else are you hearing that are things we should probably be aware of, and trying to even design the, you know, the focus group, the conversation meetings that we're going to be having? Are there things that you're hearing that we need to be aware of?
So I think that there's probably, I've heard in some places, people's concerned about supporting developers, or the concept that developers would be getting some sort of support by putting restrictions on units. I think to the same case, it also pre-existing housing stock is the flip side of that conversation. If we're able to capture pre-existing, there's less development. So, but I think those are two sides of the same coin in that argument.
Mm-hmm.
Dave?
Yeah, I think going back to Judy's original question about people that support and the people that don't, and I think that's where we're going to get the pushback, is from these people that believe that it's supporting certain developers or development. And I think that will be our biggest pushback, because I think everyone else that is logically minded will see the benefit here. And it's simply not true. We're benefiting the buyers of those units, not the developer. I mean, the developer is going to sell them regardless. So, but I think that's where we're going to see our pushback, in my opinion.
I think that, you know, the more I think about it, I think that there's some higher level in a bifurcated market and creating a secondary market. What does that look like to stock and availability and pricing in general in both markets? I think that's something to think through on a bigger, higher level. You know, in a place that has such limited inventory as is.
Right.
I have some concern about, you know, the banking industry and how do we work with the banking industry and getting them on board, and how does this restriction affect value in existing mortgages?
Right.
And their willingness to take position or change position based on it.
I would be floored if they could do that.
But that's a big one, Judy, right? Because we need to maintain first position, because if we go into a situation that someone has very little equity in a property because we purchased the restriction and we're in second position, there's no value in paying for the restriction in the first place.
Mhm.
Vicky, I saw you kind of sit up.
Well, yeah, I mean, so the affordable housing restrictions, have in their deed riders, that the lender is that the restriction is going to be in first place. And that's what you have to do. You have to put the restriction ahead of the mortgage in order to be able to do that. And I'm not sure all the lenders will buy into that. And I think what will help is if the legislation gets passed to create the restriction itself, to allow for a perpetual year-round restriction to be actually something that they can sit behind and not worry about, because it's actually going to be legally created.
Judy, did you have a thought on that, or can I come to Meg?
Go ahead, Meg. I'm taking some notes. I want to listen in.
Yeah. Meg?
I think it's just important for us to remember that George, when he was explaining his program, and something that stuck with me was it's a negotiation and it's up to us with each property. So if someone's like way underwater with their mortgage or whatever, and we would be placed second and it would just there'd be no value, that would just be an opportunity that we would pass on, So that's my thought about that for a second. But the other point I wanted to mention, Judy, was just that in conversations I've had with friends and colleagues and neighbors who own their homes, the question is really about, can they rent it? How much can they rent it? And I can just see people getting up in the community, getting up in arms about, I think those parameters need to be so super clear and so super tight in our messaging so that people understand that it's one or the other. You're either short-term renting or you're doing a deed restriction, but you're not going to be able to do both, so that people understand it's a even playing ground and everyone needs to adhere to the same rules and that there will be strong enforcement. So that was something I wanted to share.
So, Vicky, I'm familiar with the restriction having to be in first place too, but usually the way that happens is you've got a development, there are first-time home buyer units in it, the units are going to be sold, and all of that paperwork is handled before there's actually a conveyance, or it all happens at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a situation where we're talking about existing stock that's got existing mortgages. And I'm wondering really how a bank can even agree to move into second place after a restriction. I mean, at the very least, it's a question about how realistic it is. And, I'm not in banking, so I'm just raising the concern that I just question.
In my mind, Judy, it's really going to be about how much equity the position is at the time of the assessment, right? I don't think the bank's going to make any move if somebody's got an 80% LTV, but if they're at a 50% LTV, then maybe there's a position or an opportunity. I think that's going to be a really tricky part of the negotiation, as Meg points out, is what's the bank's willingness to move. And then that poses a challenge from my perspective with the first-time home buyer and creating down payment assistance and what's their LTV in the situation, right? That becomes a really tricky part of this.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Chantal? And then I'll come to you, Meg.
Thank you. I feel like you guys have been doing this significantly longer than I have been. How is the covenant program structured? Because I kind of imagined it would be similar to that.
So to Judy's point, in the covenant program are pre-existing units that people choose to put the covenant on, generally at the time of creation, whether it's a new secondary lot that they approve by the planning board, or they build it for that purpose, and the restriction is put on. And then we do have banks that are familiar with that, which is advantageous to us. The hard part is going to be, the 10,000 square foot lot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that was built in 1995 that represents a great opportunity and the person's at a 75% loan to value and their bank required 25% down. If we reduce the value of the property by putting the deed restriction on, will they allow first position? That's gonna be the struggle part. Penny?
Yeah, I just want to say before getting too far down this road, I really think we ought to be consulting some banking professionals locally.
Yeah, that's
I
kind of
think
where I'm.
that's, yeah,
agree.
that's Judy's goal on the focus groups. Who do we pull in? And I think with those bankers, it's the local lawyers who are dealing with the closings with those banks as kind of a mutual group. Penny, I'm gonna come to
Yeah, we
Meg.
can
Any
also
quick follow-up?
suggest, we can just to follow up, suggest some names with contact information, people that have been heavily involved in, for instance, the Covenant program. So happy to suggest some people outside the meeting. Thanks.
Meg, you had your hand up.
I was just curious if we could reach out to George and just see what has been happening in Vail with these types of situations, what experience he's had, because he's already been through this so many times. He might have thoughts and helpful ideas.
I think that channel is definitely open for us, so we can. Dave, did you have a? You didn't. Okay, Judy, I'll come back to you.
So my biggest concern coming into this was, identifying potential sources of concern, but also potential allies. I'm trying to think about how these groups are going to be populated, but also even if we don't have a group designated for the consultation process, there's other things that need to be happening in terms of communication in the community about this project. And I'm just wondering where you think the major sources of support might come. And also, if any of you are familiar with how Act Now is approaching what they're trying to pursue. Are we talking about the same kind of program, or is Act Now going in a somewhat different direction? Does anybody know? Is that a conversation that needs to be happening with Julia and Al? I see two hands up. That's my question.
I'll come to Penny and then Dave, and then I have a thought.
Yeah, just really quickly, as far as I know, the Act Now program is targeted towards people that are currently doing short-term rentals to try and subsidize the rental income, the potential loss of rental income if they commit to year-round. That's a very overly simplistic explanation. And I think what we're trying to do here is much broader than that. Just my opinion.
Dave?
Yeah, listen, I applaud their efforts. I think that it's a sugar high and not a robust meal that we're offering, right? Because it depends on, so what they're doing is they're focusing on, my understanding, and I could be wrong, is single rooms and small cottages that are currently short-term rented, and they're looking to flip them over, but they have a budget. So I guess it depends on how long that's going to be funded to how long that program lasts. And so, we're offering in perpetuity, and they're offering until the money runs out, I think. So I'm not sure, and maybe that's not a fair representation, but that's my understanding.
So I think my position is that I think Act Now could probably be a great advocate for this program once they understand what we're trying to put together. To the first part of your question, from my perspective, where is the largest group of advocacy or opportunity? I believe that there is a population of people on Nantucket between 58 and 70 years old that has had ownership for more than 20 years and a low basis in their property, nearing retirement or in retirement, where the cost of living on Nantucket's become so unaffordable that any opportunity to capture their equity for either the ability to continue to live here, improvements to their home, aging in place, home healthcare situations. I think that there's probably a strong opportunity to capture restrictions in that population who used to be active in the community, whether it was working and voting, now doesn't necessarily have as much of a voice. I think that's the largest opportunity block in my mind. I have another concern that I've been thinking about is that that group is probably the largest need I think that in the creation of this program, we need to be cautious with the opportunities of existing investors. There are a handful of investors in the year-round marketplace. There's one investor that comes to mind that owns 90 year-round rentals. And those properties are year-round rentals, and they will continue to be year-round rentals. There's also the business owner that may own 4 or 5 units or homes or spaces. If we have a limited opportunity of funding, how do we direct the buckets of funding to
Right.
capture units in a way? Because I don't see a year-round rental investor or a business owner selling the property to the secondary market, but I see a person aging out of their home selling their property out of the year-round market. So those are things that I've been thinking about in how do we tranche is it the first 3 years it's available to this group, the next 3 years it's add another group in, then add another group in. I don't know how to capture that, but I've been daydreaming about that. Meg, then Penny.
Do we have information about like, have we done any kind of assessment, or do we have any information about what the needs are in the community right now? We're X number of houses down for year-round housing. And at the 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom scenarios, like, does that information exist anywhere?
Not outside of our last housing production plan, and then the recently updated census that we reviewed 2 meetings ago.
So maybe there's enough of a chunk of information there for us to use that to develop some sort of guidelines of what we're looking for. But then again, back to your point, Brian, where if there's an investor who has 90 properties, okay, great. Maybe we could year-round deed restrict 90 properties. That'd be amazing. But if these properties are all 3 bedrooms or 1 bedrooms or what have you, maybe that's not the best fit and the best use of our money at that time. So it's like a vetting process and it's a negotiation. So I feel like we wouldn't have to worry necessarily about the deed restriction program being like inundated or being completely monopolized by one developer, when it's up to us to make the determination of what's most valuable. And in terms of segments of the community that would be supportive, I believe that the person who maybe bought 10 or 12 years ago, who has a family, whose kids are going through school, who might be looking at college costs, would be a key component, a key group for us to target and focus on. People who might be in their 40s and have a couple of kids about to go to college, and maybe their mortgages are affordable, but they plan on living here for however long, infinitely, and then maybe they'll rent after that year round. But younger families who are busting their butts to get by right now with the cost of living here, who are looking at college and just expenses of life or need repairs or whatever. I think that there's a lot of families in that group.
Penny?
I think I wanted to add that I think that the supporters are going to come from many different quarters, including folks now that rent perhaps below market. There are hundreds of people that are renting below market right now to family, relative, extended family and friends, that would likely support this this initiative in a more permanent way going forward. That's one sector that hasn't been mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny.
So how do we establish communication with these various groups? You mentioned different groups that might have a reason to want to participate, but how do you actually connect with them?
Go ahead, Penny.
Yeah, I just think we develop a very solid program. We run it through its paces in terms of finding weak spots, faults, how can we do it better? And then we just start publicizing it. I mean, it has to be developed, and then it has to be implemented, and then it has to be enforced, right?
But Judy, Penny, I think Judy's meaning now in the kind of discovery focus conversation, how do we capture that group to come in? So I think we have a working list of a fair number of bodies of people to help us communicate, whether it's not the chamber, I'm moving on. But we could absolutely work with the current, that there's a definition and goal that was circulated to the group by Ellis. I've one edit in there, Ellis, but I think if we work with something like that and get it out to our local media partners, like the Current and the Inquirer Mirror, if there's an opportunity to advertise that in the immediate future and look for people to come back to us to connect. But it's really going to take some conversations on the street, some outreach, and some direct one-on-one with the flyer to get to people, I think.
And so I guess the question is, who's going to do that? And do we need to be thinking about having some type of as part of the evolution of this project over the next few months, some kind of an ambassadors for year-round housing restriction or something, because I don't think you guys can do it all.
That's an interesting idea for the first focus group. Do we call in some ambassadors and look for some people? I think we can easily distribute the information after this meeting. If anybody has any feedback on the program definition that Ellis created, to the local media outlets and start the conversation there. And then Ellis was going to work through the list of shared names and follow up contact information and reach out directly to the groups and individuals in sharing this kind of definition flyer.
Hey, Alice, can you send me that stuff? I think you did, but I don't know where it is right now. So can you just make sure I've got it too, just so I know what everybody's talking about? Thank you.
I will resend the new
Yeah,
format to
thank
everybody.
you. I'm positive you sent it, but God only knows where it is now. Thank you.
Meg?
Can you just clarify, Judy, what you mean by how are we going to communicate this? Is it how are we going to communicate the desire to create this restriction program, or how are we going to communicate that we are creating focus groups?
I think it's beginning to think now about how you build support for whatever is going to go to town meeting next year, most likely a home rule petition, but you're one group. And I know you all have ties to other groups in Nantucket, but I also know you're all really busy. And I'm just thinking about how do you sort of get the word out beyond the housing trust and yet control the message enough that it's being clear. So sometimes groups will have sort of an ambassadors of whatever the initiative, and you're beginning to think now about who those non-housing trust people might be, who will be able to kind of communicate on behalf of this project what's being done and why people should support it. Who are your supporters outside this group that you think you can rely on to help?
So could I follow up, Brian?
Go ahead.
So I think in that case, it sounds like what we need is an outreach program, and we could utilize our housing newsletter. And maybe we could go to like 97.7 and see if we could do a short interview with them. Maybe Brian wants to do it. Maybe somebody else wants to do it. Just talking about the concept of this and how beneficial it would be for the community, and use social media, ask the town to post things that we can push. And then with our partners, like I know Housing Nantucket would support us, and they'd put it in a newsletter, and other places that share our vision. So I think besides just having one-on-one conversations, if we could formalize some kind of a outreach program, that would go a long way to draw people into the conversation leading up to a town meeting.
Thank you, Meg. I'll come to Tom and then Vicky.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I was thinking that the Housing Stakeholders Group, which I am a member of for my job for Nantucket Food, Fuel, and Rental Assistance, we meet once a month, and there's a lot of good folks on that, including Ann Kuspa, myself, and Janice, and a representative from the hospital, and Beth Ann Meehan, and et cetera. So I think they might have some really good outreach through that group.
So Judy, I don't know if you've seen the list that Ellis has been working on. People have been giving her input. She's got a spreadsheet of a variety of groups already and individual names with some contact information for an outreach effort. I do see we've recently been joined by one of our media outlets. So they're recognizing that we may need some help distributing some information. Vicky, I saw your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Brian. I was going to suggest that perhaps having some community meetings, that the trust could organize something where, one or two of you can, post a meeting, open to the public even, just to, for informational purposes to try to gather support. I think that I know the town has used that in other projects that they've tried to get some support behind in the past. And I think that perhaps informational community meetings might be worthwhile just to get a sense of what's out there from the public. And I think the people that like Tom had listed at at his place of work also, I think, are very, very helpful type of contacts for you. But I do believe in having like a meeting, a set meeting, not just handing out or having an advertisement or a posting. I think it helps to have personal contact.
We do have that built into the schedule, sort of into October after we've done the initial focus group, so that we have something to talk about, and sort of. So that I agree with you. I mean, I think especially, I hate to say this, but I guess I will. Sometimes people get very suspicious on Nantucket of what people's motives are. And I think we just want to make sure everybody understands, what is truly a humanitarian objective here. And I just think that message has got to get out there. I worry about kind of what I've seen over the last several months, and I'd like to see you guys not fall prey to that same kind of venom.
Judy, what is the manageable number of individuals attending a focus group?
Well, to some extent, it depends on how long the focus group is. So
I think we have them blocked at an hour and a half, right?
Well, yeah, I'm thinking an hour and 15 minutes, and then 15 minutes to sort of get your brain back, and maybe take a few notes. But 6 works pretty well. I think you start getting bigger than that, it becomes a challenge.
And so how many focus groups are we looking for? So 9 before the first community meeting?
I think we've got, I think there are 9 in here. And I was actually trying in my schedule to, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we've got 9 in here right now. And
so we're looking for roughly 50 to 60 people to get through the focus group, which is not a big number when you think about all the categories of people. Like we just covered lawyers and bankers. There's one whole group there, right? There's a homeowner group. There's a business owner group. There's a variety of groups quickly.
We have real estate and market experts in here, and I was kind of assuming banks would sort of fit into that group, but I don't know that we need to increase the number of focus groups, but I do think it gets to this question of being very strategic about who's in them. I mean, we've done focus groups with as many as 8 people, but I'm telling you, you don't want to go over that. That is just the absolute max. And I think 6 is really just the better number. But okay. I mean, we needed to accommodate somebody who was just really important to you folks. We'd figure out how to do that.
That's helpful to understand. I'm going to come to Chantal and then Ellis.
I was going to mention what Judy was actually talking about, and I'm glad she brought it up, that whatever our messaging is, we need to be the ones sharing that information. We need to ensure that we're offering the community opportunities to ask us questions directly so that they can hear it directly from us. I think too often the rumor mills of Nantucket and the year-round community group, and people will take a flyer or a bulletin and post it on there, and before you know it, it's spiraled so far out of control and turned into something that it absolutely isn't. I think what we're trying to do is so well intended and is going to be so amazing for this community that we need to make sure we're communicating that as clearly as possible. And we keep hearing that we're not transparent in our intentions and and how we're using funding and such. And I think that we just need to make sure that whatever we do, we're the ones communicating it and not leaving it for people to just misinterpret and make, you know.
So Chantal, one of the things that really, I'm just looking at the schedule, and one of the things we had in here early on, and it was intentional, was a sort of brief community survey. Now, we don't have to do that exactly when it's in here, but I'd like to sort of get something out into the community soon.
Yeah.
That is a question format, so it's clear that we're looking for input and information, and also trying to find out in the process what people don't know.
Mhm.
You know,
I love that.
and so we were going to create that survey, give it to you guys to pick apart, and then get it on our survey platform and give you a link and so forth. But let's just get some initial feedback. And I don't care if there are, 50 respondents or 500, it's not really the point. We don't want to run this for a month. It's really it's a test. So what do people know or not know? And begin to get a sense of maybe where there may be some misinformation out there that we can start to tackle through public input. So I'm with you.
Alice, to you.
Yeah, I think when Tucker and I and you, Brian, had a little conversation, we decided that the bankers would be its own focus groups. That way we can have the conversation about the loans and becoming first instead of second with the bankers and get a better understanding on what they think it's possible or not. That was my first thing. And then second thing is sometimes you don't get support because people don't have the knowledge, people don't have the information. We also need to think about the people that are also struggling to find housing.
Yep.
And we need to hear from them. Sorry to say this, but very often I hear that people don't really feel represented by this group. And that's another reason why we need to get as much as representation by the community, because I think that will bring more support.
Wow, Brian, this trust has come a long way when you think about it.
Right?
I just,
It's awesome.
but you, Rima, I mean, I just think back to where we were just before the strategic planning process, and like, you couldn't get members and people didn't want to serve. And now it's like everybody wants to control the housing trust. It's just funny in a way. I mean, it's not funny, but it's, for those of you who weren't involved, it was a very different trust a few years ago. So
It's a cool funny.
yeah, it's a cool
It's
fun.
cool. Rima.
Oh. Hi, sorry I'm late. Yeah, I have included residents in Sagem's Path who had received our help with closing cost assistance. And not only do I think they'd be great in the focus groups, but as far as ambassadors go, they tell the best stories, about how their struggles and how we helped. And I think that we'll get a lot of support from those constituents that have been helped through our initial, public program. There aren't a lot of banks out here. So I think, what do we have? 3, 4. So, a lawyer, a real estate person in the bank group would probably be a good idea as well, just to round it out to 6. But I am excited for the survey. I think the survey is important. I know people grumble about them, but I really think it's a great way to take the temperature.
Yeah.
So, I'm happy to do that. And Ellis, I hope you got the draft that I sent of sort of a reconfigured flyer information. So, I'm on it. I'm sorry, my verbose contractor was here getting ready for the window delivery tomorrow. in my really stuffed up, messy house and with barking dogs. So, and my son and his girlfriend lost their housing, so they moved in last night, and they'll probably be here for a year until I can get my tenant out of my cottage. So we can put them on the focus group.
Thank you, Remo. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Sorry for them. Tom?
Yeah, just adding on to what Rima said, for all Habitat houses, part of the agreement is that you kind of go out there and make the pitch on why it's so successful, the program, and to talk about being a Habitat homeowner. So I think that's exactly the kind of folks, and Habitat did build 2 houses in Sachem's Path. So those folks should definitely be included.
It's a good idea.
Alice, will you make sure that Judy has kind of the most current list that of the spreadsheet that was
Yes. I will.
working on? Great.
I just wanted to make sure that, is that Billy Cassidy that just came in?
Yes, it is, Alice.
Great.
The green Zoom user. More. Or Judy, you want to switch topics? I think that got you some positive and some objectors. Was there another line on?
Not really. No, I think this is perfectly helpful. I mean, when I first put that schedule together, I had included, what are your goals, but I think that's sort of become clearer to me over the last few meetings anyway. So for me, it was really kind of scoping out friends, enemies, Romans, countrymen, just trying to put my box around this and beginning to think about how we create a sort of friends of or ambassadors group, or call it what you will. It's beginning to lay the groundwork for support. So when this, whatever it is that we're doing, goes to town meeting, and I agree with Vicky, it's really going to be a home rule petition, that there's just going to be people knocking down the doors to get in.
So Judy, so I'll give you my big, fat, audacious, specific goal related to this, and it's 1,258 restrictions. And I base that on being 20% of the year-round housing stock. If 10% is 629 for our AMI number, that's my very specific goal number.
1,258, did you say?
1,258. So if we're making goals, that's mine.
Okay. Anybody else want to offer one? That's a pretty good one. That's very specific.
Seeing nobody jump, Vicky, you had your hand up.
Well, I don't have a goal, but in a way I do. I'm concerned about getting this ready, the home rule petition ready in time for it to be on the warrant.
Yep.
We are in a really tight timeline. I think it's going to have to be approved middle of January at the latest, is what I've heard. So it's going to have to be ready relatively quickly. So that's my concern. And we're going to have to sort of formulate our ideas quickly, and perhaps looking at what other, I'll get the other bills that have been filed or worked on to give us a framework, perhaps, and something to refer to. But it takes time. And
so I have us wrapping up all the sort of public outreach, participation, and so forth by the end of November, so that the December gets devoted to putting the meat on this, so to speak, so that really you guys are done by the end of December. And if you're asking me to accelerate that, I can certainly try. But it just means that the trust is going to have to, there's just probably be more work on a more intensive timeline, Vicky. So this is actually helpful to know if they have sort of a blessing to you on this, on at least the skeleton of the home rule petition, even if you're still working on some of the specific text. If you have that by Christmas time, does that work for you or not?
I'm going to have to go and check and see when this has to go. It's going to have to go before the select board. I'm not sure when those meetings will be. I think Libby has probably a schedule, and I'm gonna just need to
Yes.
sort of check with her
Okay,
as to when I would need to get it before her.
Okay.
To be on the warrant.
so that's really important for me to know, because
Okay.
when I started putting this schedule together, what I think I heard from Tucker was end of the year. So I was aiming for end of the year. And I'm not averse to trying to modify this some. I just need to know ASAP, because I've got a zillion other projects going on in here. It's nuts right now.
Penny and then Meg.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, Vicky. Vicky, do you have a follow-up?
Well, I just wanted to say, I'm gonna check with Libby about the meeting schedule to get that before the board, select board, and then I'll let you know, Judy.
Thank you.
Okay.
Penny, then Meg.
Yeah, just quickly through the chair to you, Vicky. Would this article, would it be sponsored by the select board? It would have to be, wouldn't it? Or,
Mhm.
okay,
Well, yeah, I think so.
okay. And then secondarily, just what is your experience with the sort of last half dozen home rule petitions that we've sent to Boston? How long are they taking? Outside of the transfer fee?
A couple of years on the average.
If there's any
yeah,
way to
2
do
years.
this without doing it through a home rule petition that is more expeditious, I think we need to seriously explore that.
So if you think of doing it where we started our discussion about doing it as a zoning bylaw, that's not a quick process either.
Either.
Mm.
Okay.
Right.
I
So
think
really,
we
I
would
mean,
have,
Really,
I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry, I just to temper people's expectations. I mean, we're looking at something that's 2 to 3 years out here, right?
Could
so
be.
I think that it will be interesting. I haven't heard anything, and I could certainly check with the Nantucket, like Senator Sears' office, one of his aides, or Dylan Fernandez's aide, just to see where those couple of bills that have already been filed are, that Provincetown filed. For instance, I would think it would be interesting to see where they are in the process. Because they were filed, I think, in February, I want to say.
The last time I was on the general court website, Vicky, they were just like referred to committee.
Right.
Referred to committee, and there was no other entries, which
Right.
Could mean a committee's got it and they're gonna run with it, or it could mean it's in committee now and we're going to just keep it here, as you well know.
Yeah.
So Penny to follow up, and
Yeah,
then
just
Meg, and then Tom.
my last thing on this, which is, again, through you to Vicky, is it possible if Provincetown is, say, a year ahead of us, and we fashion something similar that will potentially get through a little faster once somebody else does?
So the first bill that I think is really important are the amendments to Chapter 184, because that establishes a perpetual year-round restriction, and adds it to the list like a conservation restriction and an affordable housing restriction. So I think that's an important bill, and I'm not sure where that is in the process either. That wasn't specifically sponsored, I don't think, and I'll go back and check. I don't think it was specifically sponsored by Provincetown. I think there were a couple of other municipalities on board. So I certainly will do a little investigation and try to get some information for you as to where those bills are. And but I do think the first bill is really important to get a definition, a legal definition to work with.
To get it right. Thank you.
I apologize for not understanding my next statement well enough, but is there? I keep hearing reference to a seasonal communities definition potentially happening at the State House, and is this something that would run concurrently with that, or be added onto that? Or I don't know what I'm really talking about here, so I'm just throwing it out there to Judy or Tom or Vicky, who may understand the term and the process a little more.
Well, do you mean more like a 6-month type, limited occupancy, you know, they can't use the property for more than like 6 months of the year in season,
No.
like that.
What I mean is I keep hearing terminology to keep proponents on the Cape and Islands looking to get a definition of themselves as a seasonal community, which would give them greater latitude and opportunity with relation to housing and restrictions. And no, I'm getting a no from Judy.
I thought that there's something about using that definition in conjunction with the subsidized housing inventory list, so that it would adjust the number of units that the town has to have in order to meet, you know, to meet the level. So I think that's where I've seen it used. But,
Okay.
I think that's what they're aiming for.
Okay.
The
Okay,
real-
but we're
will
seeing no
never
legs
end.
on that coming out of Judy saying no legs there. Okay. So Meg's been incredibly patient, then I'll come to Tom.
I wanted to say that I think through you, Brian, to Judy, if we could get that Provincetown program documentation to review and see how much of that we can, you know, sink our teeth into and utilize without recreating the wheel, so that we're not spending October and November starting from scratch, that could be really helpful. And I'm also just curious, I think you just mentioned this, Penny, but how long ago did Provincetown file the home rule petition, and when was it approved? Like, how long did their process take? Are they like a year behind?
No, they're in it. They started and it's not approved. So it's
Not
sitting
approved.
it's sitting in committee and we don't know what'll happen. Often, sometimes things go to committee and die, and some things go to committee and get voted through. So
And sometimes they go to committee and sit there for 7 years.
yeah.
So I
like,
read that-
housing bill.
So I read that Provincetown Select Board approved it, but now it's just at the State House.
Correct.
Got it.
Same thing with the housing bank bill.
Okay.
Same idea.
Got it. So that made me think that, and when I was reading about Provincetown and their latest updates, they've had a ton of support from their select board. So luckily we have Tom here, but if we could do some more outreach to the select board and put this at the top of their priority list, which I hope it already is on their radar, and I hope it is a big priority for them. But I think having the select board champion this cause is really going to be important. I know that town government is tricky right now, but if they can just absolutely positively get behind this and support it and do that kind of outreach and support for us, I think that is important. And then my last question, because I have to hop off to take my son to 6th grade orientation in a second, but my last question was, Brian, to you, or maybe Penny or anyone, but is there an opportunity in the Nantucket housing market the way it is now for someone to buy into the market and use the deed restriction program to help them cover their cost of their down payment? Like, is that even remotely possible? Or are we talking, because of the medium cost of Nantucket housing right now, are we really more looking at existing homeowners?
It's impossible to answer based on the inventory or the pricing. It's really going to be regulated by the bank and their willingness to take position on the restriction and the mortgage. Because the answer to your question is the least expensive house on the market freestanding is $1.7 million. So if a person has $170,000 down payment, they could go to the bank and get a loan and do it. If you're looking to use some pound of this program as down payment assistance, will the bank write a mortgage, and at what personal equity that I need to have in the deal? And I'll speak for myself. I could never answer that question. It's a banking question.
Yeah, that'd be a really cool question to get an answer from the banking people when we talk to them. Because I think if we could galvanize the renters who are looking to buy, who feel completely priced out of the market, and if they ever want to own, they're going to move. If we could get that group to support this, that would be really important and really meaningful for the year-round community of working class people.
Thank you, Meg. Come to Tom.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just quickly on a few little points there. Judy and Vicky are absolutely correct that those bills are still in committee, and it will probably be a while. One thing that's let's just say gumming up the works is the potential statewide transfer fee legislation and also rent control coming out of mainly Boston, which could end up being a ballot initiative, or who knows. But there's so many things going on with housing in the Commonwealth right now that it seems like a lot of the, shall I say, smaller stuff is kind of on hold. So in talking to my former colleagues, I don't think any of that is going to move right away, but it could all of a sudden move, and then there's a lot of movement. And that leads me to my kind of second point. I think that getting the home rule petition, if that's the strategy, and getting it done earlier and getting that to the legislature, or at least passed, and it being, okay, here's another municipality, another town that supported this, along with Provincetown et al.'s desire to have a similar thing, it shows the legislature that there's more of a groundswell for very, very similar things. And then just quickly, I would also say I have a very good friend who serves on one of the Outer Cape select boards who is working on this, and also happy to have maybe Senator Sears' district director, Michael, who knows a lot about this, come in and answer any questions at one of our meetings, if that's something the chair and the committee deem appropriate or wanted.
Thank you, Tom. I give you a thumbs up on setting that up. Maybe when we get a little deeper through the focus groups, and so there's a little bit more of a whole conversation, but I'll defer to Judy on scheduling. Back to you, Judy.
I mean, my experience with any of these bills is that the real estate industry and the Home Builders Association, the sway that they hold in the legislature is huge. And in as much as Nantucket is an important place in the Commonwealth, I hate to tell you, but your importance doesn't outweigh the importance of those parties. And what they care about is supply. That's what they care about. So when they see initiatives coming at them that suggest something other than production and supply, it raises issues for them, and they have the ear of many, many legislators. So, you know, I lived through the 10+ years it took to get CPA passed. And the only reason it passed is that affordable housing was added to the mix, and historic preservation. I mean, because when it was just seen as an open space bill, those pressures were what they were. So these things end up kind of evolving out of sometimes ugly compromises, or you know, or some sort of trade-off that gets tacked on that may not be what you want, but it gets you where you are trying to get. That's why I'm saying I don't think this is going to happen overnight. This is a haul.
All right. Well, let's lean into it. We're going to start someday.
I know, absolutely. I'm not trying to discourage you. It's just the reality of what happens with these bills.
We'll grind. I'm going to come to Rima and then hopefully wrap this segment, because we're going to lose a couple members on things at executive session to talk about. Rima?
Yeah, I think it's important that we balance our outreach and marketing between going for existing stock and development, because obviously we don't have enough housing for the year-round community. There's going to need to be more development. That's what we're doing with our land. So, you know, let's just try to strike a balance here and include both sectors. So, you know, this isn't a stop development situation. This is a house, you know, the year-round community. And it's obviously a major deficit. So that's just, I think that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Any final comments? Judy, do you have any final parting words, or can I close this segment?
Not today. You're fine.
Thank you. That was super productive. I'll close item 5. Look to item 6, other business. Next meeting is September 5th. We've a fair amount to cover in that meeting. Board comments, item 7. Any comments from members of the board? Seeing none, item 8, executive session, look for a motion for us to adjourn the regular meeting, not to return, to consider the purpose or the purchase, exchange, lease, or real value of property where an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of this body. Is there someone to make that motion?
So moved.
And a
Second.
Second from Tom. So with that, we'll leave this meeting and join the other link.
You gotta
Thank you,
vote.
Judy.
Vote.
Roll call.
Vote.
You gotta
Oh,
vote.
vote by roll call. Sorry. Thank you. Chantal Murphy,
Aye.
Dave Iverson. Thank goodness we have a sharp group. Tom Dixon,
Aye.
Rima Sherry.
Aye.
Penny Dye,
Aye.
and Brian Sullivan's and I. Okay.
Could I just
Oh.
ask Alice to send a link for the executive session? I still haven't gotten it yet.
I just sent it right before this meeting again. I'll send it again.
Here it comes.
Thank
Okay,
you, Alice.
great, thank you.